Dr. Ian Orlesser is the Vice President and Executive Director of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He's now joining us live from Brussels. Dr. Ian, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, Doctor, in the initial stages of the war, Hezbollah said that it will not join the war. Then days later, cross-border hostilities between Hezbollah and Israeli forces emerged. Iran now says it does not want the Israel-Hamas conflict to spread out. The West and Washington, in particular, think otherwise. What do you think is going to happen? Could the conflict spread across the region? Is there any likelihood of that happening?
Well, there's a very real risk of it happening. And in fact, already we have seen attacks launched from Yemen. We've seen the United States shooting down drones and cruise missiles that have been launched from Yemen. Other things are going on. In fact, they predate the October 7th events between Iranian-backed militias in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and also others, and Israel. So there's a long history of this at a lower level, but there is now the potential for this to become a fully fledged front in the war. I am not sure, frankly, at the end of the day, that Iran wants to see that, but it's also not entirely clear that it's itself in control of the escalatory dynamics, and certainly the United States wishes to deter this above all.
Doctor, we are receiving reports of some people arming themselves. What do you think could be the impact of that?
Well, I think it's well worth noting for your viewers that Israel has long had a very large, basically reserve army, and there are weapons associated with that. So many Israelis are used to having weapons at home under lock and key that they would then take out when they're mobilized, basically. And this is, large numbers of age groups, actually. It's not just a sort of so-called draft age men and women, and it is men and women in Israel. So, there are a lot of light arms in Israeli society already. It is, as you note, very difficult to actually get a license for weapons in Israel as a civilian. But these are very extraordinary times, and as you note, there are political forces in Israel that are looking to have the population more heavily armed, especially, in fact, for these settlements that are in the West Bank, which feel very exposed. So that, too, is another, less serious perhaps than the Iranian angle, but still, at some level, an opportunity for new incidents and things that could escalate.
Doctor, Israel Defense Forces are continuing to urge Gazans to move southwards, yet they are cutting communication channels. Israel insists they will continue with their second phase of operations. Countries world over have begun calling for a ceasefire, even though the humanitarian situation is dire at the moment. In your view, what are the likely scenarios in the coming days? I
think, the shock of this cross-border terrorism in Israel, and that's what it was, and the risk that it could continue if Hamas remains in place, is really driving Israeli policy, and it's pushing to the side considerations of humanitarian welfare, of proportionality, of many other things. And of course, there's an intense debate about this inside Israel. But the shock of this event, it's right in some ways to compare it to 9/11 in the United States. In fact, given the scale of the society, it's a much bigger attack. It seems existential to Israelis. And under those conditions, there is very little interest in restraint at the moment. Eventually, perhaps, yes. And it could be that actually a ground intervention will be less lethal to civilians who are in the way than the sort of air attack that we're seeing at the moment. But we're not there yet. And it's extremely costly. Israel is obviously trying to reduce the costs for its own forces when it is fully on the ground. But the humanitarian cost of that is obvious.
All right, I've been talking to Dr. Ian Orlesser, is the Vice President and Executive Director of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Doctor, thank you for talking to us today.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.